I'm 39. I'm 6'3", 205, long hair, and the person walking towards me is the exact same height, the exact same length of hair, and the exact same facial structure. And as I tell this woman, welcome to the Hall of Reflection, here's me coming towards me.
Greetings from the Pacific Northwest. You're listening to Symbolic Studies Episode 5. I'm your host, Mario, joined by my lovely wife, Michelle. For more information about the show or my work, please visit symbolicstudies.com. If you'd like to become a monthly patron, you can do so at patreon.com/symbolicstudies or on my site. And we have just entered Gemini season, and I feel as though this sign resonates with me very deeply and strongly. In fact, I feel like Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer I have a unique relationship with, so I'm excited to be here with my beautiful co-host. Michelle, how are you, and how are things looking out there? Because, as you know, astrology is all about the changing seasons, and what better way to sort of get into the sign by discussing what's happening out there in nature.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here as always, and I'm doing great. And I will say that what I'm noticing right now is the acceleration of growth of the plants in the garden, the grass, the trees, the shrubs, the vegetables, all of it really are just exploding. There's been like a growth spurt. It's like the Gemini growth spurt that happens right now around this time. And out here, it was actually really unseasonably dry. And then we started getting some rain happening last week. And so with the rain, it's really now coming on. And so it's a good time to be even still planting seeds when there's rain, because then you're getting that consistent moisture that a seed needs to germinate.
Yeah, right. And also we have some small trails near us, and they are really, really becoming quite thick these days, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting what you said before we started recording, that it kind of reminded you of Mercury. And Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini. Mercury is the traveler. And in this case, with the plants, they're traveling upward. And even when I think of Mercury going to the other side. Mercury, Hermes, they're well-known psychopomps, right? So they're guides of souls. They take people to the great beyond, right? And I always imagine that as a vertical ascent. And you really see that out in nature right now.
Yeah, definitely. I too see the vertical ascent in that way. And I think that the plant world is kind of like a bridge between us and the other world sometimes. Like there's an entry point that you can find in terms of, even if you want to call it plant communication or just building a relationship with a plant, there's something that happens on the ethereal level, in my opinion, that you can connect with the plant realm. And that to me is also a mercurial Gemini aspect of this whole thing that we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so I gave a presentation probably a couple years ago now called The Cosmic Tree. And it was all about world tree symbolism. And essentially all plants, especially plants, I would say, that do shoot upward, trees and things like that, they're all bridges to the other side, right? And so that's kind of what they symbolically represent. And there's a number of stories that relate to this. So one of the key ones I'm thinking of is Jack and the Beanstalk, right? It's this magical plant that was able to take him to the other side, to take him to, the heavens. And so that's really what all plants symbolically represent. They are all bridges. And I would say even all symbols, that's what they really represent. Symbols are bridges to the other side. Symbols are bridges to the divine, right? They're bridges to a higher order, if you want to put it that way. And as this relates to Gemini, I think one of the most practical sorts of things we can take away from Gemini symbolism is that, of course, Gemini represents the relationship between you and other people, partners, colleagues, family, etc. Oftentimes, a lot of the symbolism connected to Gemini has to do with brothers as well. Obviously, Gemini is the twins. And I would say that the most practical thing you can take away from a lot of this is your relationship with your higher self, right? And sort of your inner landscape. And so this idea that what you see in the mirror, of course, definitely divine as is. And there's a lot to be said about your physical body, but you need to have a good relationship with yourself. And I think a lot of symbolism connected to air and communication has to do with this. And that as humans, we're really good at kind of hiding things from ourselves, right? And I think we're really good at kind of telling ourselves lies in a certain way. I think we're really good at kind of keeping certain truths away from our awareness of things. We can ignore things and we can avoid doing this sort of work. But whenever Gemini season comes around, I always think about my relationship with my higher self, my invisible twin, my spiritual double, if you want to put it that way. So that's what I see within the twins, even within the glyph of Gemini itself, right? Not just two twins, two brothers, or lovers. The lovers card is associated with Gemini, not external sort of pairings like that, but sort of an internal pairing, right? And so just wanted to get that one off my chest because I feel like it's a relevant conversation to be had year around, but especially during this time of year.
I would definitely agree with that. And I really love that you brought it up because it makes me think of a couple things. And one of them is how the plant represents the bridge that takes you to the higher realms. You know, plants, at least for me, in my experience, they allow you to tap into the inner self. Once you begin to establish relationships with plants, even if it's just one plant that you are for some reason resonating with or drawn to spend time with or harvest or utilize, the plant is going to show you things about yourself that you may not have seen or known or paid attention to before. And because there's such a subtle level of energy that's happening between the plants and nature and us. And it's easy to just walk past a whole forest of a plethora of different plants and wildlife and everything else and not think about it. And that's kind of how a lot of people look at nature. But when you really take that time to really look at it as if you were looking in a mirror, you know, using a plant as a mirror, you know, how do we mimic each other? How does the plant mimic you and how are you mimicking the plant? And you really do start to open up this whole other realm that you actually really weren't thinking about. It becomes so much more than just a plant in a pot.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you brought up the mirror because the mirror is such a powerful symbol. And you oftentimes actually, and it makes a lot of sense, you can see how it relates to Gemini. But what I was going to say is that there are some tarot cards that will include a mirror with the Lover's card. There's also some pieces of art that I'm thinking of that are about Gemini that also include a mirror. The one in particular that comes to mind is Jofra Boschart's painting of Gemini. There's a mirror there. And mirror symbolism makes so much sense to talk about right now because of this reflective dynamic, right? It's even been said that the mirror is the symbol of symbols.
Ah.
And that makes a lot of sense. As you're saying, you can learn about yourself by analyzing, decoding, spending time learning about these plants the same way humans have a fascination with the animal kingdom and everything else. And you might be looking at a wild animal, but you're taking away something about your nature when you're observing that kind of world, right? Because everything here truly is reflective of the one, of supreme unity, right? And that really is a huge part of this conversation as well. When you think about Gemini, clearly we have a pair. Usually it's a light twin and then the dark twin, a light brother or a dark brother. This is echoed in so many myths, oftentimes called hero twin myths. So I'm thinking of Romulus and Remus in Rome, Castor and Pollux in the Greek pantheon, but even like Cain and Abel in the Bible, I think are very much emblematic of this. And the lovers once again in the tarot, which is ruled by Gemini, which all makes sense too, by the way, that the lovers is ruled by Gemini and Gemini is ruled by Mercury, because Mercury has this androgynous nature. Everyone knows that Mercury has this feminine aspect and this masculine aspect, because really, in essence, there's a 3-in-1 sort of triune dynamic with Mercury, which I've gone into in other presentations, but there is a masculine and a feminine, and then there is this transcendental aspect that I think precedes actually the masculine and the feminine. So when we're thinking about the two, we have to realize that the two came from the one. And this is really how I see numerology as well, is that the number 2 is 2 halves of the one, or it's the one split into 2. You can't have 2 ones. And so when you're describing 2, you're really describing the 2 aspects of the one. So you're really describing polarity, the negative, the positive, the masculine, the feminine, the dark and the light, right? The yin and the yang would be another way of putting it. And so when you're describing, say, the number 3, you're describing 3 aspects of the one. When you're describing the number 4 represents the 4 aspects of the one, right? And it just all sort of descends from there. But when you go to the top of the hierarchy, it's the monad, it's the one, it's the singular that is at the apex of everything, just like a pyramid or any kind of hierarchical sort of structure that way. And so when people think of Gemini, I know I used to do this, and I think the Lovers card kind of influenced me this way. I would think of the 2, Roman numeral 2 is the glyph for Gemini, and I would automatically think of the unification of the twins. I would think of the unification of the lovers. I would think of the unification aspect of the number 2, 2 things coming together, this sort of unification, right? And in actuality, what I've learned over time is when you start studying the number 2 and you start studying twin symbolism, it's actually more so about division. You have to acknowledge that the 2 came from the 1. And so this is echoed in Gemini storylines and hero twin stories, that they are coming from a unified place, from this monad. And oftentimes it's actually the twins coming from a cosmic egg. Like that's the storyline with Castor and Pollux, and Leda and the Swan is the mythology behind that. And so they came from this cosmic egg, or this egg, which essentially kind of is symbolic of like a unified seed or a unified sort of presence in a way. So from the monad, the 2 came. The 2 actually has a lot to do with division. That's interesting as well, because we're dealing with air symbolism. And in the tarot, air corresponds with the swords. Well, what does the sword do? The sword divides. It splits things, it severs, it cuts cords, right? It pierces. And so I literally see it that air symbolism very strongly relates to division, like the mathematical function of division. And the sword also relates to this division as well. Symbolically, the sword will take the monad or the 1 and split it into 2, right? So now you even have the yin and the yang, or you have the light twin and the dark twin and everything else. And so 2 is the number of separation, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. It's the number of separation. And so when you look into the number 2, you're going to see symbolism relating to conflict, aggression, war. And so you have these 2 sides pitted against each other. And for this reason, I think it's really interesting that Gemini also corresponds with the arms. Generally, you're going to see the lungs or the arms be the correspondences for Gemini, right, on the human body. I love the arm sort of analogy because you have the left-hand path and you have the right-hand path, right? You have this aspect that's more yin and feminine, and then this aspect that's more masculine, more projective, things like that. And I think that's fascinating too, because when you just take the word arm and see how else we use it, it's pretty interesting. As an example, the Second Amendment is the right to what? Bear arms. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with the Second Amendment, number 2, just like Gemini.
That's a great point.
And then we also have armies, right, that go to war. And so you're dealing with at least 2 factions fighting against each other. This reminds me of the fact as well And this came from the book by Ross Ben, The Rock of Ages.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about how during the age of Gemini, this is when a lot of new weapons were developed. And that actually he describes the age of Gemini as being a warring age for this reason. That there was always two brothers or twins that fought each other. Symbolically, that those stories kind of encode symbolism associated with the age of Gemini. And so we have all of these different things kind of in the mix right now, right? The light twin versus dark twin and all of that. But the number 2 is the main point that I wanted to hammer home here, is that the 2 represents actually separation. And then I would say you can't have unification without that initial separation, which I think is what the Lovers really is about. And I think that that's what love and partnership and marriage is about too, is on a deeper level, on a more cosmic sort of grand level. Love is about two beings reuniting because they originally came from the one way back when, that we all come from source. And so when we come together in this life, it's a reunification, basically.
That's brilliant.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Some of the symbolism relates to the alchemical marriage and even the glyph for the heart as well. So if you imagine where the heart sort of splits up top, it's like the monad splitting into 2, but then reunifying at the bottom tip, right?
Gotcha.
That's sort of one way of looking at it. But that's one thing that I'm really convinced of. And this kind of, it makes a lot of sense when you start looking into symbolism on a deeper level that this would be the case, because when you look into the yin, you will find the yang. And when you look into the yang, you will find the yin. And that just seems to be how it always works. So it would make sense that masculine, feminine, black and white, positive, negative, it all came from a unified place to begin with. Hey everyone, it's Mario. I hope you're enjoying our discussion on Gemini symbolism so far. If you aren't already aware, I have a series called Symbolic Secrets that's only available on my site or via Patreon. At the moment, I'm releasing one presentation for every major arcana card and have released 14 so far. That's about 14 hours worth of exclusive content. Links for everything can be found at symbolicstudies.com. Or if you want to go straight to my Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/symbolicstudies. A subscription is just $5 a month. This is the perfect way to support the show if you like what you're hearing. All right, back to the episode.
Well, related to that, I wrote down a quote from the Penguin Dictionary of Symbols when I was preparing for our show today, and it was on the section of the number 2. And he says, it's a symbol of confrontation, conflict, and recoil, and denotes either balance achieved or hidden threat, which I thought was very interesting, which goes along with all of the things that you were just talking about. Because with Gemini and Mercury, one of the other things that really stood out to me was the number 2 and this branching off point that happens from the one or from the plant stem or from whatever one first thing that is going to be branching, like a road, so I think of the crossroads, which is also related to Gemini and Mercury. But that point where the branching begins is Gemini. That is representative of Gemini because it's almost like it's that initiation of the split that is what Mercury represents.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the whole thing with even, I would say, the arm analogy, right? 2 arms that come from a unified place.
Ah, right.
And I would say our legs are related to that. And that relates to some Piscean symbolism. I also think of rivers splitting from a main river, from a larger river, right? And so vein symbolism comes to mind, but absolutely, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and we could keep going because there's all sorts of systems, the lymphatic system, the nervous system of the body. It's all branching. It all looks like branching, and it branches out throughout the entire body to carry things, whether it's fluids or messages or impulses. It is carrying something to and from another place.
Yes, exactly. And so this symbolism with Gemini is so fundamental that you could really go on and on and on about it. And I would say a lot of symbolism associated with Gemini and also Mercury is embedded in the Hermetic principles, right? So Hermes Mercury, the Hermetic principles. So like what you'll find in the Kabbalion, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
All of the dynamics having to do with the above and the below and gender symbolism and positive and negative stuff and vibration and whatnot. It's all there. But we've asked a few special guests to send us recordings about Gemini symbolism. So let's get the party started and play some of those. We'll give our commentary. I'm very excited about this round. And we also have some voicemails from followers, and I'm very curious to see what they have to say about the sign.
Yeah, let's do it.
And the first voicemail we have for today comes from Robert Phoenix. He's one of the special guests. And if you've never heard Robert speak, I really encourage you to check out his channel on YouTube and see some of his interviews. Go to his website. I'm going to have the links for everything Robert Phoenix in the description. And I just have to say, he is my favorite astrologer. I really appreciate him for so many different reasons. He's very, very insightful. And so when he said he was on board to submit something, I was really excited. I also had a chance to meet him in the fall. I spoke at his conference. I had an excellent time. And, you know, what can I say? He's just my cup of tea. So here we have it, Robert Phoenix on Gemini.
Gemini Reflection, Robert Phoenix. It's 1999, and I'm actually at the Hotel Phoenix in San Francisco. It's a hip, retro-style hotel, and I'm in the bar. It's a good-sized bar, and it's a cool night. There's a DJ playing, and it's got kind of a bit of an international vibe or sound. And I'm talking with this woman, and I'm trying to impress her a little bit. And my goal is to eventually wind up in some other place besides the bar, right? And I decided to give her like a kind of a tour of the hotel. I want to take her to the lobby because the lobby's got, again, kind of this hipster vibe, right? And I said, hey, would you like to see the lobby of this hotel? It's kind of cool. And I'm thinking, well, maybe, we could go someplace else after the lobby, right? Now, this bar is connected to the lobby of the hotel by about a 20-foot, we'll call it a gangway. And on both sides of this sort of gangway are mirrors. Like a mirror on one side and a mirror on the other. And as I'm entering this gangway with this woman to go to the lobby, something weird happens. As I walk into the gangway with her, I say, welcome to the Hall of Reflection. And at that moment, an absolute double of me is walking towards us. I'm 39, I'm 6'3", 205, long hair, and the person walking towards me is the exact same height, the exact same length of hair, and the exact same facial structure. And as I tell this woman, welcome to the Hall of Reflection, here's me coming towards me. And as he comes towards me and I come towards him, we look at each other and say nothing. It was too weird. And ultimately it was too weird for the woman that I was with because nothing happened with her as well. But it was not lost on her that that was one of the strangest things that she had ever seen. And it happened one night at the Phoenix Hotel.
All right. Thank you, Robert, for the submission. A Gemini reflection indeed. That was very interesting. Had no idea what to expect. This is the first time we're listening to the voicemail. That's what we do for the shows. And I love that. The Hall of Reflection. And he was trying to meet his other half, sort of symbolically, right? And he did. except it was his other half.
Right.
It was his doppelganger.
Yes.
So to me, that's really, really funny. And I could see why he submitted that. I think it's interesting too, the Hotel Phoenix, and we're dealing with Robert Phoenix, clearly. And so I'd be curious to know, what time of year it was, things like that. I wonder if there's anything else kind of weavy in the mix. I thought it was awesome that we were talking about mirror symbolism. You brought up the mirror, and here we go. Had no idea that he'd be bringing it up as well. But it really is the perfect sort of symbol to bring up during this time. I'm also just reminded of the fact that the first mirror, it's often said, is water. The first mirror to ever exist is water. People seeing the reflection in water before anything else. I'm also reminded of the fact that Mercury is a liquid metal, and there is sort of a reflective mirroring kind of dynamic with that as well. And so overall, I just thought this was super interesting. The mirror also has been used as a symbol for gateways and portals. Mm-hmm. Look no further than, Alice in Wonderland as an example, right? But what did you think about the voicemail, Bob?
I really liked it. It's a very creative approach to bring his Gemini reflection into the fold here. And, one of the things, too, that I think of with this whole situation, which I think is so incredibly synchronistic that it's like you can't deny what's going on here. A mirror will bring you into the present moment instantly. You can't deny that. You can try and deny what you're seeing in the mirror. You can try and deflect what you might be seeing, or you might not want to look in the mirror, or, whatever that is going on. But there's no way you can't not be present when you're looking in a mirror, because it's forcing you to. You're forced to have that moment of clarity or reflection to see what's going on. And I think that that's what the universe was providing for him on multiple levels. Not only was it a mirror on the wall, but it was literally a human mirror heading towards him. And then vice versa for the other man who was his doppelganger. They were getting that moment of clarity, that moment of stillness where you can't deny what's in front of you anymore because it's just so blatantly obvious. Even though none of them verbally acknowledged it, it was acknowledged on a different level, maybe even on more of an etheric level.
Right. And to your point as well, I just think this is really interesting. I've heard a couple of people who went through really tough periods in their life with addiction and things like that. And I thought it was fascinating to hear, again, from more than one person, that they avoided looking in the mirror for years because they were afraid of what they were going to see, right? And I could totally see how that would be the case. If you don't want to confront yourself, you're not going to look in the mirror. And I know as well people that might have body image issues only look at a small mirror that shows their face, right? They don't want to be in front of a full body sort of mirror because of what you're saying. It can be too much if you're not prepared for that.
Yeah, it becomes too real. It becomes very real what the present moment is presenting and bringing. And I've had a personal experience like that myself, being at a salon. And when you're at a salon or you're having your hair cut or something like that, you're looking right at yourself. There's multiple reasons why there's a mirror. It's also for the beautician who's cutting your hair. But having a profound moment of seeing myself in a mirror while I was having my haircut and having just gone through a really challenging time in my life, so many things just flooded into me of me realizing it was up to me to make the changes I was hoping and wishing for. And that was like a huge, huge, huge moment in my life as a younger person. And I always remember that one because of that mirror dynamic.
And here's the other thing about it, is that it can be too real and you are seeing your reflection, which can be difficult to deal with depending on where you're at in life and the circumstances you find yourself in. But there's also an illusory aspect to that as well. And so you can put on makeup, you can get your hair done, you can have surgeries, right? You can have plastic surgery on your face and everything else. And is that a true reflection of who you actually are?
Yeah.
There's a surface level aspect to this as well. Mm-hmm. So I see both as being the case, right?
Yeah, that's a great point to remember too, that there's both sides of this.
And that's the whole entire thing, you know, of you having this physical body, but there is a spiritual essence to who you are that cannot be seen. And I would even say cannot actually be described. It's indescribable. And I think a lot of sort of spiritual truths are sort of like that, that there's no amount of reading you can do. There's no amount of words. There's no color in the spectrum of colors that you can use to sort of accurately describe some of these things. It becomes indescribable. So that was great. Was not expecting to go there. Once again, thank you, Robert Phoenix. That was fantastic. And for our next special guest here, we have Kyle Denton from Tippecanoe Herbs. Kyle is an herbalist. He is a symbologist. He's a father. He's an all-around intelligent guy, and I knew from the beginning I wanted to have Kyle on. I figured Gemini season would be a good time to bring him on board. We've streamed with Kyle a number of times at this point. Really respect the guy, and I know of him through you and from your Milwaukee connection, right?
Yes, definitely. My hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's where Kyle and his wife have their shop, and I was home visiting and was in the area of Bayview and realized that there was an herb shop. And this was years ago, and ended up going in there with my mom and was able to connect with Kyle and Serena. And ever since then, I feel like we've been able to build a really great relationship. Kyle is an herbalist as I am, and he's somebody I really look up to. I've learned and continue to learn a lot from him. And he's just one of those people that he has such a broad understanding of many things in life. And he was the first person I thought of when Gemini came up. And I'm very excited to hear what he has to bring to the table today.
Hey, Mario. Hey, Michelle. Hey, everybody out there. Thank you so much for inviting me on to weave about Gemini. It is an honor. I love your show. It is awesome. But first, I want to tell you about my dinner. My wife made me this plate of pasta, and I'm like, it's got some pesto on it, and I'm just like scarfing it down. And there's a new shape of pasta I've never had before. I'm like, what is this? This is really interesting. And she goes, it's Gemini. Did you know that there's a type of pasta called Gemini? It's called gemelli, which is the Italian word for twins and also Gemini. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is really profound. And the way that gemelli is like you have imagine you took two really big spaghetti noodles, like big old fat spaghetti noodles, and then you twisted them together like there's a spiral, and then you cut them into regular like penne or rigatone sized, 2-inch sized pasta pieces. And so I like stabbed one with a fork, and I'm like, oh, I think I could see all 7 hermetic principles in this. I'm looking at it horizontally, and it's like the wave shape, and I look at it straight down, and it's a spiraling down. And she notices that I'm not like scarfing my food as much. She's like, is the pasta good? And I'm like, it's just so fascinating. And it's woven together. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to use this pasta as a great inspiration to weave Gemini. So first of all, when I'm thinking about Gemini, I'm thinking about the planetary ruler of Mercury, and some of the correspondences with Mercury and Gemini is Gemini being an air sign and having a lot to do with the intellect, obviously. And so here I am eating this. I think the pesto is the perfect topping for gemelli pasta, because pesto, specifically basil pesto, the Genovese basil pesto, because basil is a member of the mint family. And members of the mint family, I think, are really great correspondence for Gemini, because mint, as in the mint plant, but also mint, as in the mind. And so all the members of the mint family have this really great connection with Mercury, whether it's Gemini or Virgo, and they are enlivening to the mind. They help with concentration. They help with your breath. And I'm going to talk about breath here in a second too. But one of the things that I'm noticing when I'm eating this pasta, this spiral, the word spiral comes to mind. and spire all, the spirit of all. And so the word spire, if we break that in, we could see where that word fits in with inspire, inspiration, respiration, this intake of the breath. We're breathing in not only our life force energy, but this connection to all the source, right? It comes in through the lungs. And so wild and like a medical astrological correspondence here, Gemini is said to be the ruler of communication, yes, but also the lungs, but I would say part way the lungs. And we can kind of like suss that out by looking at some of the other air signs. In the Chinese tradition, it's said that the kidneys are the seat of the essence, what's called Jing in China. But the essence, and the essence is like our blueprint. It's like our morphogenic field. So it's the essence of Mario that makes you look like a human. And it's the essence of a squirrel that makes it look like a squirrel. And the essence of a cat that makes it look like a cat. Essence builds our bones. And our essence is the kidneys draw in the essence from the lungs. So in the traditional model, the kidneys are the ones that are responsible for inspiration. And that makes sense from the air signs because Libra rules the kidneys, and that is cardinal air. So taking in the air. Now, Aquarius, the fixed sign, is the space between the breaths. So it's the air's all there. It's not leaving yet, but also Aquarius, not just being an air sign, it's also like an electric sign. So it has a lot to do with like the charge and using oxygen as the vehicle to bring that electrical capacity from the ether that the kidneys have drawn in and charging our body. And then when that is mixed with all of our fluids and all of our personality and everything, and it's time to move on, then we expire, expiration. And that is the mutable aspect of air. And that is Gemini. So Gemini to me is not just about the rulership of the lungs, but it is this movement of sharing that energy that we've taken in and sharing it back with the field again. You know, Gemini, the constellation of Gemini, it's got Castor and Pollux. I can't remember which one is which, but one of them is the kind of like the immortal hero. It has this connection with immortality. And the other one is like the mortal twin. And to me, that's a perfect one-to-one with what we're just talking about here, because I take in the breath of the ether and all of the electricity to my mortal body and breathe it back out again. It's mixed now out forever for everybody else and everything else that wants to take a part of the essence this communication of what's inside of me that I just shared. So that's the spiral that's in this gemelli pasta. Like, oh man, this pasta is so good. And I'm also thinking about the spiral too as mercurial too, as like the psychopomp that goes between worlds. And maybe some people might imagine like going up from the underworld and then straight up line to heaven and straight back down again. But I think of things in nature as not necessarily like going straight up, but they have like a spiral aspect to them. Even the things that have a straight line are still twisting and spiraling in a way. And so one of my, I think a really great creature to have like a totemic mercurial animal is the squirrel. It's like a total Gemini little animal, right? It's like, make up your mind, squirrel. Are you going to cross the road? He's like, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to cross the road. No, I'm going to stand in front of your car. No, I'm going to go back. No, I'm going to go. Okay, now I'm not on the tree. Now, once I get to the tree, I'm going to spiral up. No, you can't see me. I'm going to go around the tree. And you try to go around the tree to see the squirrel and it just keeps spiraling up. And it has this psychopomp energy of like, I'm going to go up and get the acorn and up to the heavens, get the acorn and then throw it back down and then plant it in the underworld. And so there's the spiral and the gemelli pasta as well. And here's a little joke what kind of cigarette brand would the hermeticist, the Gemini mercurial hermeticist, smoke? Menthol cigarettes. Newport, in fact, because ports, of course, are the place of commerce and going in and out and exchanging new ideas. But that's all. Thanks so much, y'all. Much love and buon appetito.
All right. Many thanks, Kyle, for that submission. Really appreciate it. You're making me hungry over here for some pasta. I love a lot of what you put on the table here. One of the last things you mentioned was this squirrel being related to Mercury or Hermes, and that's definitely appropriate. I'm thinking of the squirrel in the Norse pantheon that essentially represents the same thing, going up a tree, symbolic of going up the world tree or Yggdrasil or something along those lines. And you brought up a lot of stuff having to do with mutable air and this exhaling sort of dynamic. That's beautiful and is completely on point for sure. I even think of the inhale and exhale as being very much symbolic of Gemini as well. And even of this sort of journey to the afterlife or underworld and coming back again, almost like an infinity sign, right? This sort of run and return, this inhalation, exhalation sort of dynamic. So that's very cool. It also reminded me of some of what we were talking about before we started recording and the plants that you wanted to bring up in relation to Gemini and how there are sort of several air correspondences between these plants. So I know you wanted to talk about Usnea a little bit. I believe you said that they're referred to as the lungs of the forest. Cannabis was something that we talked about briefly. And there's obviously this inhalation aspect with consuming cannabis as a smokable, and then also lavender, right? And just even the scent of lavender, right? So what do you have to say about the air aspect here? I know that's something that you probably wanted to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Kyle. As always, great insights. And I love the pasta connection. I could just picture you at the kitchen table and you dissecting the pasta and having all these profound thoughts. So that's awesome. And I was really glad that you brought up the mint family because it was in line with one of the plants, which is lavender, that I wanted to bring into the fold. And the connection, as Mario just said, and what you mentioned, Kyle, of the movement of breath. Because when we smell lavender, it's highly regarded for its ability to help you relax. So a lot of times you're taking a deep breath in through your nose to smell the scent of beautiful lavender, and you're releasing that breath by going, I feel more relaxed now than I did before I took that first breath. And to me, lavender and Mercury go hand in hand. You can see it in the growth patterns of the plant itself. You know, you have that wonderful long stem, which comes into a further point where the flowers protrude from the stem going upward to the sky. And it's very thin and straight, and it's very hardy as well. And so there's something beautiful about the connection with Gemini and lavender that I wanted to just bring to the table quickly. Usnea, which is a little bit more of a further out there plant. Some people might not know what it is. It's actually not a plant, it's a lichen. And a lichen is basically a combination of a fungus and an algae. And that to me is also mercurial because then you have that dual aspect too, of its two different elements coming together to form that lichen.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And just have to say that Usnea is something that we see on a near daily basis up here in the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of people may not be familiar with it, but it's a beautiful, beautiful plant. Although I guess it's not a plant, but describe what it looks like for people, because I think it kind of fills in the gap with the exhalation air lung sort of correspondence.
Sure. Yeah. You know, it looks like an old man's beard. And that's also a folk nickname for it, is old man's beard. It has the similar structure to Spanish moss, which kind of hangs from trees in the south in Florida. I know it's very prevalent there. It also mirrors the shape of the lymphatic system in the body, in my opinion. When you see a map of like the lymphatic system on like a digital representation of what our lymphatic system looks like, it kind of has tentacles almost. And Usnea is very much like that. It's kind of fluffy, yet it is hardy at the same time. And it has a really wonderful scent to it. It's kind of hard to describe. It smells fresh like a forest, but it also almost has like a medicinal scent to it. Most people would refer to this lichen as an antibacterial lichen. I kind of like to look at it as something that encourages our lymphatic system to help us naturally detox. And so if it is taken on that level as an antibiotic, it will not affect you like a pharmaceutical antibiotic. It won't harm your gut flora. It's not going to take away. It's actually going to bring more protection. The other one thing that I just wanted to add into there is that there's a really strong grandfather energy to Usnea. There's a wisdom there. That old man's beard spirit comes through. And just a side note on a quick dream I had when I was working with Usnea was seeing the Usnea on a tree in the dream and hearing the words, "I am the guardian of the forest ether." And that to me really, really illustrates what Usnea represents. And that to me is why I also think it's a mercurial lichen.
And then you also think cannabis has a mercurial correspondence, although what you've come across is a lot of people say that it relates more to Saturn. But just intuitively, I see more of a mercurial sort of thing as well.
Yes, I do too. And over the years, as I've worked closely with cannabis on multiple levels, once I began growing it was when I really started to see the Gemini mercurial aspects of it, because it grows quickly. You also have this kind of thing that happens with cannabis where cannabis can become a hermaphrodite. It can hermaphrodite halfway through its growing season if it's too stressed out, if there's too much sun, if there's not enough water, if the nutrients aren't right. It will just flip its gender, and it can become a male. But the female is what's sought after. That's where we're getting the beautiful smokable and medicinal flowers from. And so I find too that cannabis, if you are tuned in and using it on a responsible level, it is going to help you go inward in a great way. And I think that it opens up that channel to the inner world in a really great, wonderful way. And it can also take you in places that aren't as pleasant, so it's very dependent on what's happening in your life. But, when it's used like that, I feel like it can really be a helpful, wonderful medicine.
Right. And the other thing I'll just add is the fact that Mercury is a shapeshifter. Mm-hmm. To be mercurial is to change and evolve or wear different masks, something along these lines. And to me, that perfectly describes cannabis and your relationship with it too, because a lot of people have to reevaluate their relationship with it on occasion because it does change. It's very, very fluid that way. And Mercury is definitely a fluid deity in so many different ways.
Yeah. And actually, one thing that I did think of too with the cannabis when I was writing down notes is the Gemini aspect of cannabis. When you're looking at sativa versus indica, and I know that there's debate on this, this classification of what kind of cannabis is it, this and that. I think that the sativa strain is the Gemini side of the cannabis, whereas the indica is more of the Saturnian, because the indicas will kind of usually make you feel a little bit more lethargic. It's a little bit more of a body high. You might become what they'll call couch locked more. With an indica versus a sativa is usually it's much more heady, it's much more energetic, creative, that energy, it's more creative when it comes through. And so I kind of just wanted to throw that in there as well, just showing the dualistic nature of perhaps the Saturn and Gemini correspondence with cannabis.
All right, so moving on, we do have one last voicemail from a very special guest. But before we get there, I do have a couple of submissions from listeners, and they have their 2 cents to throw into the mix regarding Gemini symbolism. So let's play a couple of those, and then we can play our final voicemail.
Hey, Mario and Michelle. Been really enjoying your guys' work lately, and I wanted to contribute on this one because I recently went out with my camera. I was going to film some stars, and I noticed Castor and Pollux in the night sky, so I filmed them and made a post about it. Thought I'd share with you guys since the opportunity was given. I wrote that Pollux represents the immortal soul, the divine counterpart to the human form. It's connected to mysticism, endurance of the spirit, and sometimes karmic challenges. Pollux can bring intensity and transformative experiences. Castor reflects the mortal human experience, how we navigate identity, memory, and communication. It carries an energy of refinement, curiosity, and intellect, yet may also reflect conflict or confusion when dualities are not harmonized. As we went through the full moon in Scorpio, consider Scorpio as a sign of death and rebirth. The myth of Castor and Pollux represents this perfectly. Pollux asks Zeus to share his immortality with Castor so they can be together, symbolizing sacrifice, love, and integration. This mirrors Scorpio's themes of surrender, deep soul bonds, and merging with the divine. I thought that was apropos considering those energies are quite powerful, and we're probably still feeling some of the effects of those going into this week. So I just thought I would share. And then I wanted to also mention when I zoom into these stars, I'm purposefully filming them out of focus to kind of exaggerate those unique perturbations that we see in each star. So thanks for letting me share. You guys have a good one.
All right. Thank you, Logan, for the submission here. And thank you for being a supporter as well. I know that he's been in the mix for a while now. He's purchased your products, and I've met him online for a session or two. And I've checked out his recordings of Castor and Pollux there, the 2 stars of Gemini, and he does good work. It's super interesting. And I like what he brought to the table. We haven't really talked about Castor and Pollux too much, right? But one of the twins being immortal, Pollux, and then Castor being mortal, Pollux being more so related to spirit and nighttime, and then Castor more so related to matter and daytime. And really, however you want to split it up, it's all applicable as well. I know these stars have even been referred to as the morning and evening stars as well. Usually that's associated with Venus, but it also applies here. And I know they've also been associated with all sorts of different things like the essence of black and white and whatnot, which is something that you brought up in regards to this conversation, right? The idea of one twin being light, the other twin being dark, and how obviously there's this gray area in between the black and the white. And I really see that Mercury in many ways represents that gray area as well. Being able to go to the light, being able to go to the dark. Because Mercury really is a synthesis or is a sort of fusion between these two things, even precedes this duality or polarity, right? And so in many ways, too, just another metaphor to highlight this would be that I see that Mercury more so relates to the central pillar versus the 2 side pillars. So when you're looking at the Gemini glyph, you have the 2 pillars, masculine, feminine, black and white, what have you. But there's always this third pillar in the middle, this implied pillar, which is more of the transcendental pillar. And all you have to do is look at the Kabbalistic tree of life. You'll see that there's 2 pillars, but there's also this central pillar, right? Which I see as kind of being the first pillar, in actuality. I think it's interesting. One of the things that I wanted to highlight here, and I don't see it as much in Castor and Pollux, but a lot of other hero twin myths, this idea that the twins oftentimes relate to a nomadic sort of identity or a nomadic culture versus the agrarian sedentary culture or identity. And you really see that with like Cain and Abel as an example. Cain is symbolic of the agrarian, Abel is more so symbolic of the nomad. And Renee Guénon says that the hero twin dynamic really has to do with the nomad versus the agrarian. Cain being the agrarian, Abel being the nomad. And Romulus and Remus really relates to this as well, the Roman hero twins. And what happens is the agrarian always kills the nomad. And they are often associated with founding a city or founding the first town in the case of Cain. Cain founded the first city, Romulus and Remus, they built the first wall in Rome. We literally get Rome from Romulus, and they built this first wall, and this is actually where Romulus kills Remus. And so I think that that's pretty interesting. And I think this is actually, of all things, encoded in the Sun card. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but a lot of older versions of the Sun card, you have 2 children in front of a brick wall. This is symbolic of this relationship. Those are the Gemini twins. And Gemini actually has a relationship with brick symbolism. So a few of my books refer to Gemini season as a pile of bricks, right? So this is something that I found in my book, Babylonian Star Lore, that the ancient Babylonians referred to Gemini season as the brick mold. And then I know in one of my resources, it says that this is also a Peruvian thing as well, that there is a very strong correspondence with brick and brick making with Gemini. And my understanding is this is because it's Gemini season when you can actually start baking bricks underneath the sun. And so this is also the beginning of various construction projects using those bricks. So for a long time, it sounds strange, but for a long time, brick making and using bricks has been associated with Gemini. And so on the Sun card, again, you see 2 children in front of a brick wall, right? So I think that that's really fascinating. And then again, Romulus and Remus, they're building the first wall in Rome. So those are a few things that kind of came to mind, not necessarily, again, Castor and Pollux related necessarily, but it just reminded me of just the overall dynamic of these hero twin stories. And I cannot remember which one is which, but between Castor and Pollux, one is often associated with chariot symbolism and with travel. And so that reminds me of the nomadic sort of thing. And then I know one of them was also a fighter or a boxer, right? And that kind of reminds me of like standing your ground. So it makes me wonder if the chariot dynamic is related to the nomadic travel component. Also with a chariot that's oftentimes being pulled by a horse. Nomadic cultures have a very strong relationship with their animals because they're going on caravans with their animals, with their horses and cattle and things like that, versus the agrarian is staying put. So that is actually why the agrarian kills the nomad, because as the agrarian sets up shop, if you will, and establishes a town or establishes a city, starts building walls, that's going to prevent the nomad from freely traveling, right? So as agrarian society has become the norm, that has really done a lot of damage to nomads because there's less and less space for the nomad to actually be able to travel, throughout the year and everything else. So I wanted to mention that because I do see it as being sort of an integral part of Gemini symbolism in general. So now when I see the Gemini twins, I do think of the nomad and the agrarian, that's kind of a deep-seated, sort of baked-in aspect to their mythology.
Wow, that's awesome. And so thank you, Logan, for submitting that and inspiring the hero twin stories to come out, because it's such a great dynamic that we can see playing out in the world all around us every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say just one last thing about that. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things that I learned about the agrarian versus the nomad is their preference in artwork, of all things. And so nomadic cultures, they prefer art that unfolds over time. So that is, music and poetry. And I found that a lot of nomadic cultures are actually like anti-image, and they don't like visual symbols or iconography. This is something that you still see baked into Islam, being basically bred out of like a nomadic sort of civilization, from my understanding of things. And so they prefer to not have Muhammad illustrated. They prefer to not have the human form illustrated, right? This goes back to nomadic sensibilities, in my opinion. So they prefer art that unfolds over time versus the agrarian prefers art that unfolds over space. So that includes imagery. that includes things like painting and drawing and icons and whatnot.
And buildings.
And buildings, exactly. So it includes architecture. So what Rene Guénon says is that agrarians prefer what he calls plastic arts, right? And this makes all of the sense in the world. If you're traveling and you're nomadic, you're not going to build things to last. That's not the whole point. The whole point is to travel and to, you know, in some cases, I know that they were literally following the sun, right? They were following the sun. Oftentimes they were following other creatures, other animals that have migration patterns like swans and other birds and whatnot. So the idea is to perpetually travel. And so the worst thing you can do to a nomad is prevent them from traveling. And these nomads, there's still some nomads that are around today, and there's interviews with them and everything else. They don't like the city. They don't even like towns. They don't like villages. They don't like to stay put like that. In fact, they kind of see it as a prison, which I think is really interesting as well. And then the worst thing you can do for an agrarian sedentary peoples is to displace them, is to force them to move, to force them to leave their home country or home village or something along those lines. And so anyways, yeah, it's all very, very interesting. But now that I have this information under my belt, I can really see how it affects absolutely everything. And I can see now I have a better understanding of sort of what I'm living in, you know, as being an American in the West, right? This is an agrarian sedentary culture. Here's, okay, now I promise you the last thing about this. So if a nomadic culture, essentially, if they are off-centered and they are not grounded, according to Rene Guénon, the whole dynamic is if they find themselves out of balance, what happens is they destroy everything they come in contact with. So as they travel, it becomes very parasitic. And so they will destroy and take and sort of corrupt everything that they touch, right? Very, very interesting. Now, the agrarian sedentary culture, if they are off balance and not centered, what they turn to is aimless consumerism.
Wow.
They just buy, and they hoard, and they take aimlessly.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
It says a lot, actually, when you start thinking about it. And so that's the world that we find ourselves in now, I would say. So anyway, thank you, Logan. Once again, we've got another voicemail here from a listener. Let's see what they have to say.
Hello to everyone listening. I have a couple of ideas that I would like to share with you about Gemini, especially in connection with the Lover's card in Tarot. The first thing is that if we write the glyph of Gemini a couple times on top of each other and we twist the whole row in the middle, it kind of becomes like the DNA helix. And obviously a child of two lovers will carry the DNA material of the parents. Another thing that came to mind about this connection is that I often hear two kind of controversial and opposing ideas about love. The first one is that we are drawn to someone who is pretty similar to us. We see ourselves in that person. And the second one is that we are attracted to people who have personality traits that we are missing from ourselves. So it's almost like we are either a literal twin of the person we are in love with, or they are our complete opposite, like a twin flame. Of course, these ideas are kind of the two ends of a spectrum, but I thought they are still worth exploring, especially because in polytheistic religions, we often see that some of the gods marry their own siblings, like Osiris and Isis, for instance. And this idea about being either the same or being opposites, it reminds me of mirror hours or angel numbers too. For example, on a digital clock, the same numbers are repeated twice, like 1212, or it's the same number but the other way around, like 1221.
All right, Arican, thank you so much for that submission. Early on in the voicemail, she mentioned something about the DNA helix, right? And I think that's an appropriate sort of visual to kind of keep in mind. This double helix sort of ascending because of their relationship with each other. It reminds me of a ladder as an example. And there's actually a tarot card that I have for the lovers, and it shows the couple in front of a ladder.
Ah.
And so to me, it's like this union is allowing sort of this transcendental quality to sort of occur, and that there is an ascension dynamic with the two coming together. And it reminds me too of other cards where the two lovers are in the front and then there's a mountain, a central mountain in the background, right? The mountain is all about ascension and moving upward and sort of going to a unified sort of place. And so that's kind of what came to mind when she mentioned that. I also think it's interesting that she did point out the dynamic of looking for someone who is similar to you and seeing the similarities between the two, between you and the person you choose to be with, or leaning into the opposite of seeing the differences of who you want to couple with. And I see both in play, you know, almost across the board with all relationships. You're going to find someone that you can connect with clearly on one level, and then you're going to be attracted to things that are different from you. This reminds me a little bit of the dynamic that's been referred to as the foreign prince. And a lot of royal families have this in place where they only want the king to be dethroned by a foreign prince. And this is actually to keep sort of the bloodline varied, essentially, you know, because if you're marrying somebody that's very similar to you, you know, and you do this for multiple generations, then there can be issues with that, right? Obviously, even just like inbreeding can lead to all sorts of different issues. And that is actually a very real sort of thing for some families in some parts of the world, right? That they actually need this variation in DNA to go back to DNA in order to keep the family healthy and in order for things to kind of be okay on that level, that you do want some variety. And I found it to be interesting too, that a lot of women prefer the quote unquote foreign prince.
Ah, yes. Interesting.
This is baked into the full card as well. He's kind of like a symbolic foreign prince. They're also called the traveling prince. Right. And so this is a whole entire thing where women have this sort of tendency to want to be with somebody who is different from who they grew up with, who is different from what they're sort of used to, that there is a quality there that I think is innately sort of built in, right? Would you say, do you agree with that just in general?
I would agree with that. And I think that goes along kind of with like the mysteriousness of somebody that is different from you, but on like a deeper level, that they actually come from a different land or a different culture. Definitely. Because I think too, women are attracted to, and me speaking as a woman, we have a tendency to be attracted to the quote bad boy or what have you. And a traveler can sometimes fit into that aspect or that character, you know, because you don't know what's their history, where are they going, who do they know, who have they known, and there's that kind of, you know, that mystery that keeps you really wanting to know more or grab at them or get to know them or be close to them.
Right, exactly. There's an intrigue, there's an allure there for sure. You know what this also reminds me of, because we haven't talked about the Lover's card that much, but one of the things, because she brought it up, one of the things with the Lover's card is that there's always three figures. And when you look at older versions of the Lover's card, it's hard to tell what's going on. You don't know who is marrying who. You don't know if the husband or the woman is happy. Sometimes you don't know who's a man or a woman. That's another really interesting thing. There's a lot of ambiguity with some of these older Lovers cards. And sometimes one person is touching the other person and one person's touching both of the people. And it's just very hard to discern, like, what is the storyline? Who's getting married? Are all people involved happy with the situation? Because sometimes it doesn't look like that. Sometimes it looks like people are doing it against their will.
Right.
Even. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of like tossed up in the air. And in a way, it just reminds me of some of what she said regarding this similarity versus difference sort of dynamic, and how one thing may appeal more to other people than it would to this other person. And so how kind of falling in love too, just like with the Lover's card as well. Oftentimes there's Cupid. Cupid is in the heavens with its bow and arrow, and it just shot its arrow, or it's about to shoot its arrow at somebody. And this just reminds me of the idea that sometimes you don't necessarily pick who you fall in love with, that Cupid's arrow actually picks for you, right?
Yes. And I definitely thought of that as soon as you said it. And as you go through life and you have relationships or you get crushes on people or whatever, there's usually one person that wants one or the other more. And that creates the chase, or that creates that tension dynamic that happens. Or it's somebody that you might not think you want to be in a relationship with them, but maybe you get to know them more, you get to really understand them, and you then develop that love for them that you wouldn't have thought that that was going to happen. Or it is an opposites attract thing. So it does come out of the blue that it's like, wow, that's nowhere near the type of person I thought I would be with. But guess what? That's the person I needed to excel my life, and then vice versa, do the same thing for them, because there were the dynamics, as she brought up, that you're looking for somebody that has qualities that you don't possess, so that you can in turn help each other possess those qualities that are missing in one another.
Yeah. And with all of that said, don't you think it would be cool to fall in love one day, like for real, for real?
Yeah, I'm still waiting. Where art thou, Cupid? Oh my God.
I kid. We are happily married and in love, for all of those people out there wondering.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding. Yes, of course. And our story is more of the opposites attract sort of thing. I was the chaser, and I was the one that was kind of like, oh, wow. I really like this guy, and he's very different than me. Different cultures, different outlooks even on certain things, different life paths up until that point we met. And so I feel like our relationship has illustrated that, and how the differences really, really, really can help a relationship blossom and a couple blossom as individuals and as a pair.
100%. And it just reminds me as well, Libra symbolism, also related to air, also very much related to the sword, I would say. I did a whole presentation called The Axis of Libra, and I really get into how the sword relates to the scales, and how the sword is actually like a substitute synonymous symbol for the scales. This is why you have Lady Justice holding scales in one hand and then holding a sword in the other hand. They're actually completely related to each other. And how this is all, whether you want someone who's similar to you or you want someone who's different than you, all in an effort to bring balance to the situation.
Yes.
And that's a huge part of Gemini symbolism, is balance, that they actually balance each other. So whether we're talking about the mortal and immortal, the light twin, the dark twin, the agrarian or the nomad, it's all in an effort of like a cosmic balance.
Right. And I think that within any relationship, the growth really begins to happen when one or the other are challenging each other. And that's where those differences come in. And I think that in a healthy relationship, whether it's romantic or friendship, it's really, really wonderful when you have a person who is able to challenge you on those ways, or to say, hey, are you sure about that one? Instead of just agreeing, even when you might see the other person doing something that might be detrimental to them or the world around them, being able to say, hey, it might be time for some tough love here, and not just letting those bad habits continue, because then that actually ends up corrupting the relationship, in my opinion. So I think it's very, very valuable to have relationships in your life like that.
Definitely. No, 100%. And our final voicemail for today is from a very special guest. This is from Slick Dissident. Slick is a symbolic weaver. He's really knowledgeable with the Enneagram. He's really familiar with philosophy and history and all sorts of things. And we've had the good pleasure of streaming with Slick a handful of times at this point. And he continues to blow my mind. And he continues to bring things out from left field, too, that I've never considered or thought about. As an example, he really put placenta symbolism on my radar a handful of years ago. And I know that that's what he's going to be talking about briefly, in this voicemail as well. And so maybe it's worth just getting into that, ever so slightly. There's an idea out there that the placenta is way more powerful than people realize.
Yes.
It's absolutely true on a sort of health medicinal level, right? You've actually created placenta pills and whatnot for people.
Mm-hmm.
And the mothers who actually took their placenta after giving birth had a lot of great things to say, obviously, and it worked for them. Correct?
Oh, yeah. And it's also beneficial for the baby as well, because the baby is going to be nursing on the mother. So when the mother consumes her placenta, she is regaining all of those nutrients, all the energetics from that. Everything that's going into her is going into the baby as well.
Right. And so I was aware of that, and we had talked about the placenta and everything else years ago, but Slick put on my radar the symbolic aspect of the placenta and what it represents. And over the years, I've heard him talk about how it's related to sort of the invisible spiritual double of that baby itself, right? And in this voicemail, he's going to be referring to the placenta as the daemon, right? And this would be the true self or higher self or inner guide, right? I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's what he's referring to here. And you can see how this would relate to twin symbolism, right?
Oh, yes.
The child being the child, and then the placenta sort of being this etheric double of sorts, or this spiritual sort of twin or double. So that's what he's talking about. And again, he's referring to The Shining. I think that's kind of interesting because arguably the two most famous twins in film history come from The Shining. And I'm a huge Kubrick nerd. And so that's one of my favorite movies of all time. So I'm going to let Slick Dissident say what he has to say regarding the placenta, twin symbolism, the daemon, and then we'll comment afterwards.
Big love and respect upon the house of Garza. So many hugs, Michelle. Big high fives, Mario. Thank you for having me on to rap about the twins of Gemini, the Castor and the Pollux. So just to kind of stay in the 10-minute realm, because I can rant and rant. Mario had watched the show that Zaralath and I did on his channel, Zaralath Immortal, regarding a movie review of Stanley Kubrick's film, The Shining, played forwards and backwards in a ghost image simultaneously. And in that project, I shared actually years before with the Spiders, when we did the film together, that I believe that the placenta is the demonic twin. It is your higher self. It's your big brother, so to say. And I believe it is aging in reverse. From our point of death, the placental intelligence is coming towards us. As we move forward in time, the placenta is coming backwards through time. And this is why it has the power of premonition, the power of foresight, the power of foreshadowing. All of these gut intuitions are extremely well founded, and they are coming towards us backwards through time. But something about this dynamic of how the midlife crisis formulates in the human experience has a lot to do with, people talk about the midlife crisis as the coming to Jesus, the chapel perilous, the dark night of the soul. All of these different terms are nuanced slightly to their own placement in culture. But I see them as the culmination of the expression of the middle point in your life that you may or may not actually realize. It may pass you by and you might not even recognize that that halfway point happened. But when it does, Your older self, your placental demonic twin, is actually meeting you halfway. And from that moment forward, you are no longer the younger brother. From that moment forward, you're traveling through the second half of your life, and you become the more experienced one. And you become the steward of your increasingly impetuous demonic self. And that is to say that voice that was guiding you with foresight early in your life, it will slowly diminish in its potency, and it will become more and more like a child. And you actually have to be the one who is the senior in your relationship to your demonic self on the second half of your life. And knowing that that is the way of the world, I think, would make things a lot more understandable for us looking at our elders and looking at what we have to look forward to, and also guiding the youth as they come up to the top of the Sisyphusian hill, and let them know that the boulder rolls totally different on the other side of the hill. It rolls totally different. So, yeah, that's my Platonic placental realm of conceptual elucidation on your divine twin. How many minutes am I at? 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay. I'm a huge advocate for placenta phagy. This is the practice of eating the placenta, the mother only, nobody else, not Tom Cruise, nobody else, just the mother eats the placenta, and all of the stem cells and the ancestors, maybe, the twilight biodome, the purple dawn of the other dimensions are availed to that child through the placenta-enriched breast milk. And I don't really advocate for the burning the placenta into powder and taking it in pill form. I don't think that's the way it was meant to be. I'll just say it outright. I think that's the wrong way to do it. But I also don't claim to know the exact perfect right way to do it. And the reason is because of all the witch trials. They have always targeted the midwives in the witch trials. And that's why I don't have the perfect recipe to tell people. But I do believe very thoroughly that the witch trials and the targeting of the midwives are obfuscating these obstetric truths. And I'll just point out that the word placenta phagy is twilight hidden in the word Palestine flag. The word Palestine flag is an almost near perfect anagram for placenta phagy. And it is really something that there's a certain Gemini on the world stage playing his cards towards the new emperor, the new Caesar, and he's about to recognize the state of placenta phagy, the state of the Palestine flag. That is really something, yeah. And let's not miss that old chumpster's a Gemini, right? Gemini, minor decans, Canis minor, Canis major, and Lepus, the bunny rabbit. Old chumpster's a Gemini. Well, guess what? JFK was a Gemini. JFK's birthday is right up here with the bunny rabbit. And only a few days after JFK's birthday is his brother's death day. And guess what? Only a few days after his brother's birthday is JFK's death day. They're 180 across the zodiac from each other. JFK and his brother who was assassinated are like a yin-yang marcation twinning across the zodiac from their deaths and their births. It's a matter of a week difference on both sides of the calendar there. Yeah. That's a Lepus trail for everybody to find. What am I at here? 8 minutes. Okay. Gemini, twins. Oh my goodness. It's like the best subject you could ask me about, Mario. All right. I don't think I'm going to make it to the 10-minute mark. Let me do this. The story of Romulus and Remus, the twins upon which the Roman Empire was built. I just want to point at, I think most of us are familiar with the twin theme in mythology. And I just want to say it goes way back beyond the written history of cultures building up empires on the acrimony, the inevitable acrimony of twins, brothers on brother on brother is like a civil war hail. Even in totems, the old totem poles, the base character at the foundation of most totem poles in multiple cultures is almost always twin symbols. Brothers, two characters at the bottom, at the base, at the foundation, kind of like testicles down there, maybe like ovaries too. Yeah, so the twin theme is complete in all the other cultures. But with the Romans, of course, I just want, if everybody can bring out your mental calendars and put Gemini at the top and put Libra on the right-hand side of your zodiac. In Libra is the wolf, Lupus, and the mama wolf that suckled the twins and brought them to life. If you go 9 months from Lupus the wolf around the zodiac, you land perfectly in Gemini, where Castor and Pollux are located. So the 9-month cycle on the zodiac is always important because constellations with the 9-month relationship to each other are components, they're coterminal to each other in mythology a great many times. That 270-degree segment of the zodiac. All right, I think I'm at 10 minutes. Oh man, I'm over 10 minutes. See, there I go. All right, I hope that did it, y'all. Big love and respect. Thank you so much for inviting me on, to talk about the twins, the embarazos, the bros, the embrace, the right to bear arms, your Second Amendment. All right, y'all. Much respect.
All right. Many thanks, Slick Dissident, for that submission. Very, very interesting. He has a way of putting things together that I have not seen before. And so to hear all about the placental intelligence, I thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I really enjoy that too. And that's one of the things that has always stood out to me about Slick and his information is his placenta knowledge.
Yeah. It's very deep. And he can wax poetic about it for a long time. That's for sure. But this whole idea of you moving forward in time and then your divine twin moving backwards in time, to me is really intriguing. And it just reminds me of one of the things I read when I was looking into John Dee. And in this book that I read called John Dee and the Empire of Angels by Jason Louv, at one point he says that John Dee came to the realization that time is actually moving backwards. And this is one of the greatest occult secrets out there, is that time is actually moving backwards, which is in complete opposition of everything you've come to know about time itself. And at one point, John Dee apparently sees God, and God is actually a young child. And so this kind of plays into that as well. You would think it would be this ancient, old, timeless God, and instead it's actually a young baby, right? So I think in sort of some circles, this might be referred to as the crowned and conquering child. So it did remind me of that a little bit, right? Slick also mentioned the witch trials briefly, and it just kind of occurred to me this idea of looking for a scapegoat in society is almost like looking for the evil twin in society. Therefore, you can kind of label yourself as the good twin, you know, if you're always pointing fingers at the other. And just in general, this whole idea of kind of scapegoating certain people or activities or religions, and in this case, witches, burning witches, you know, it just reminds me of this perpetual back and forth or perpetual sort of conflict there is with the so-called righteous people, you know, looking for the nefarious, evil, toxic sort of people out there. So there's many, many, many examples, right? Even in today's world, you know, the left versus the right and race war sort of stuff always bubbling up to the surface. So when he brought that up, that's just one of the things that sort of came to mind. And it just does remind me of some of this twin Gemini symbolism.
One of the things that comes to mind when we're thinking about the idea of our divine twin moving back in time as we move forward in time is the divine balance of the universe. And to me, when I look at it from that perspective, it makes a lot more sense that perhaps that is actually what is happening. That because our divine twin has already lived this past life almost of wisdom and is being able to basically regress into a younger time, but with the wisdom already intact. And so there's something about that and the balance of everything that to me checks out.
Well, yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was just saying, right? Regarding the idea of God being a child.
Yes.
You know?
Right.
And so I think that's fascinating for sure. And, you know, the other thing that he mentioned that I thought was really interesting is the fact that a lot of totem poles from around the world will have a base that's a twin in nature, right? Twin creatures or figures of some sort. That makes a lot of sense. As we're saying earlier, the Gemini symbolic weave is so fundamental that it's applicable and worth discussing at all times of the year, not just Gemini season, right? So just duality or polarity and where these two essences come from kind of speaks to that. So I thought that was really, really interesting. I'd never heard that before, but it makes a ton of sense. The other thing I wanted to bring up, just because we are talking briefly, I guess, or in a way about The Shining, one of the things I've noticed is when you see the twins in The Shining, they're always in a hallway or in a doorway. And when you're looking at the glyph for Gemini, you're looking at an implied doorway. When you see the two towers or two trees, two pillars, that is an opening of some sort. And that makes a lot of sense with The Shining as well, because there is a portal. The Overlook Hotel is a portal or is a gateway. And the whole entire movie, for the most part, takes place indoors. There are so many shots where you're going through doorways, you're going through hallways, you're opening a door. Actually, door symbolism plays a huge role in The Shining, from Jack with his axe destroying that door, the elevator scene where the doors open and the blood comes flowing out. There's the whole thing with Jack being locked into the freezer, and then that's a door that he's kind of like pounding at and everything else, and he wants to open and get out of there. So there's a lot of doorway symbolism that plays a huge, huge part in that movie, and the twins are always at a doorway or in a hallway, kind of creating that opening.
Right. And another door is him going into room 237. That's obviously one of the major turning points in the movie.
100%. And anyone who knows anything about Stanley Kubrick knows that everything was extremely deliberate.
Every second of all of his films feel like that, but The Shining in particular.
Oh, yeah. It's a masterpiece. It's my favorite of all of his films, I would say.
Yeah, I would second that.
And the other thing, too, is that I'm pretty sure the source material, the book, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it was twins. He turned them into twins for the film.
Ah.
So he had a number of changes that he kind of enacted for his script, for his version of The Shining. And this is one of the reasons why my understanding is Stephen King did not like his version of The Shining, because he changed too much of the source material. But it was all, you know, great stuff. No one could argue that he did an excellent job except for maybe the guy who wrote the book to begin with.
Yeah, I feel like I've maybe heard one or two people express that they liked the book more. And that was actually recently on a podcast. I can't even remember what I was listening to, but someone mentioned that they liked the book, Stephen King's book, more than Stanley Kubrick's version. And it kind of made me like do a double listen take thing, because I was like, wait, what? I've never heard anyone say that before. But anyway.
Right. It is interesting. That's the only Stephen King book I've ever read was The Shining, because I'm such a nerd for the movie. I wanted to know what the book's all about. But for my money, symbolically, I prefer Stanley Kubrick's version a little bit better. But anyway, that's going to conclude this episode on Gemini symbolism. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. We'll see you next month for an episode on Cancer.
Yeah, thank you everyone for submitting your voicemails. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, babe, for facilitating. And I look forward to the next episode on Cancer.
All right, until next time.
See ya.
All right, this concludes the live recording Michelle and I made on Tuesday, June 20th. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a voicemail, but especially Robert Phoenix, Kyle Denton, and Slick Dissident. Much love and respect to all of you guys. Robert's work can be found at robertphoenix.com if you're interested in his astrological services, which I've heard come highly recommended. Kyle's business, Tippecanoe Herbs, can be found at tippecanoeherbs.com, or if you're in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, you can also visit his shop in person. And last but not least, you can find Slick Dissident at slickdissident.com. Also, in case you weren't aware, I am available for tarot readings, study sessions, and symbolic birth chart readings. It's always a pleasure meeting you guys and talking symbolism. You can book a session on my site, or as always, you can text me at 503-893-4606 for more information. As always, for exclusive content, you can head on over to patreon.com/symbolic studies or symbolicstudies.com/secrets. I've gotten into the routine of posting weekly updates every Friday. Every other week, I post something exclusive just for supporters. Without a doubt, this is the best way to keep up with everything I have to offer. And that'll do it for this episode. We'll see you next month with a show on the symbolism of Cancer. Until then.